Welcome to Books, Kids, and Creations, a part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. I'm your host, Tracy Blom, and I feature people who inspire and uplift future generations with their work. And I'm speaking today with author illustrator Jessie Sima, who is here, located in New York. I'm in
Mhm.
Ohio. We're in the same
Yeah,
zone, so yay! That's always easy, easy for us.
nice. Yeah. Well,
Thank
I'm so
you.
happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Tracy.
Yeah, I'm always excited to speak with authors because sometimes guests on the show are just creatives, and it is a wide variety of people I get to speak with.
Mhm.
But when I get to speak with an illustrator and an author at the same time, that's always really special because um, it's like the unicorn trying to find somebody who's both an author, illustrator, and those two different journeys all coming together to what is now 10 books for you.
Yeah,
Um,
double digits.
so did you first begin as an author or as an illustrator?
So, my first book that came out was both author illustrator. I've done one picture book as just an illustrator. But in terms of like long term in my life, I feel like I kind of came to picture books more from the illustration side. I can talk a little bit about how I got
Yeah.
into things like that. Yeah, so when I was growing up, I was always really into drawing. I just was drawing all the time. And so I also really loved storytelling in general. I wasn't a big writer. I was a big reader, and I really liked TV and movies and theater, things that were
Yeah.
storytelling, even
Yeah.
if I wasn't writing them myself. And so at some point in my life, way down the road after going to college for an unrelated thing and coming out and being like, what do you actually
Now
want to
what?
do with your life? Yeah, I'll condense all of that into is just me feeling like I spent a lot of my time drawing. And so I was like, maybe this is a thing that you should look at and think, what do you actually spend your time enjoying doing? Drawing. And
Yeah.
I kind of rediscovered picture books. They had always been there, but I kind of forgot about them until I was out of college. And I was like, wow, what a wonderful medium for telling at the time to me surprisingly complex and interesting stories that I'd kind of forgotten from my childhood.
Yeah.
And yeah, so then I just kind of started reading more and more picture books, started thinking about how I might get into writing and illustrating them, working on that because I had not until that time really done much in the way of like sequential art. So, I
Yeah.
would draw a picture and then be like, that's the picture, versus a character doing things over time. And you're like
Right.
following, it has to be recognizable as the same character or, that sort of thing. And then yeah, then it kind of got into picture books that way. So yeah, coming at it, I think from the illustration side more so, but yeah.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you spoke about like going to college and coming out and being like, okay, an unrelatable degree to what you're
Yeah.
doing now, because I think a lot of us have done that.
Yeah.
And there's like I mean, for me personally, like I went and I got a communication degree.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, but that didn't really even tie into what I really was passionate about. And I really wish I
Yeah.
would have like really crossed that path during college, but it just didn't like come together. Like I just didn't have like that kind of guidance.
Yeah.
But it's so important to find that thing that makes you happy and
Yeah.
brings you joy. And so for you, you're like, this is it. And so
Yeah.
like how did you decide what was your first story you wanted to tell? Like what was
Mm.
this thing that was like, I need to tell this story?
Yeah. That's a great question. So just to also add one other thing about the
Yeah.
college and then not knowing what you do. After I came out of college, I then once I there was another step where I realized, oh, what you spend your time doing is drawing. You love that. And then of course my brain was like, but how do people make money
That's
making
important
art?
too.
And
Right.
so there was a period of time where I was like, I should go to school for graphic design. And so I did do only one semester of a graphic design program that I thought I was going to like, and it just wasn't for me. I think similar with maybe communications. I don't know what all
Yeah.
goes into communications, but it was like I thought that that was a way for me to be interested in a thing that I knew how you made money from that, right? I knew that
Right.
there were people looking for that skill and how you get employed with that sort of. And
Right.
it just wasn't really for me. So I don't want to make it sound like it was like some miraculous, like I came out and then I was like, I've just been drawing, I should do that. And then I like magically was just like picture books,
Right, right.
when in
There's
fact there
always a
were,
journey, and I think,
it's like,
like,
yeah,
so
all
many
very
people,
messy in
like,
there.
work 2 or 3 jobs, like, while they're
Yeah.
trying to figure it out. I mean,
Right.
you
And
gotta
there
pay
was
the
a lot
bills.
of floundering, trying to figure out how to like be a freelancer,
Yeah,
doing, all of these things. But I guess I add that to say that there was a time where I was trying to figure out what kind of stories I even wanted to tell with picture
yeah,
books and like was I interested in. And I think I really went back to my deep childhood in
yeah.
thinking about what I loved. So again, my first book was called Not Quite Narwhal. It was about a unicorn or a narwhal, and
Yeah,
he grows up under the ocean and with a whole bunch of other narwhals, believing himself to be a narwhal, and then goes on to land, meets some unicorns, and then is dealing with the identity
oh,
crisis of like, am I a
love
unicorn? Am
those.
I a narwhal? Where do I find my place? And finds a way to kind of integrate both of those and doesn't really choose which one. And I really loved unicorns growing up. I was a big unicorn kid. I grew up. I really loved The Last Unicorn, the animated
Oh,
movie.
yes,
Amazing.
yes.
It was so good. Very dark, which I also really liked
Yeah,
horror growing up, and I still really like horror now. I feel like those were really interconnected in that. And then later read the book, which I also loved. So I think the my first book really was like me trying as much as possible to like delve into my deep child psyche of like, what did you love the most? And it was
right,
like unicorns, we're doing
right.
it. And I had at different points, even though I didn't know that I wanted to do picture books and didn't know that that was a thing, came up with characters or like concepts throughout my life. So when I was in college is when I kind of came up with the first like seed of Not Quite Narwhal, of like knowing that narwhals are sometimes referred to as the unicorn of the sea, and then being like, what
Yeah,
would it be like to be a unicorn who is under the sea? And it
yeah,
does kind of tie into The Last Unicorn, where they're all kind of pushed into the ocean in a way that I wasn't thinking about.
yeah,
But yeah, so I'd say for my first book, it was like very much like trying to get in touch with the things that I really loved as a kid, and then thinking about stories that were interesting to me to then tell in that space. And uh, yeah. And then ever since, I just try to keep in mind things that I loved as a kid, things that I like now, and continue on. And that's kind of how
yeah.
I get most of my book ideas. It has to
And
do with that.
I love, like, if you look at your catalog of books, like, they all have, like, this very similar, just, like, you look at it and you go, "That's just very, gosh, what's the word?" They all just look like they all belong together. Like,
Mm-hmm.
they all are so cohesive,
Mm.
and, well, I mean, obviously, because you're the artist for all of them,
Sure.
but they all just jive, and they all look
Yeah.
like just so stunning,
Oh,
but
thank
so
you.
unique, and I
Mm-hmm.
was like, "Which one do I wanna look at first?" I mean, obviously, your new one, which I love, but,
Yeah.
like, I was like, the house, the
Mm-hmm.
not quite haunted house,
Yeah. Hardly haunted.
partly haunted. I was
Yeah.
like, "This looks amazing," and I was just kind of like, I I love how you told it from the house's perspective,
Mm-hmm.
like, so many people, I mean, I was thinking it would be from the kid's perspective or from a
Um.
family's perspective or something, and then I was like, "Oh my gosh, cool, it's from the house's perspective. That's
Yeah.
amazing." And
Yeah.
I think that it's so unique what you do. Um, and so I guess, like, when you're putting together your collection of stories, like, what do
Mm.
you view as your brand?
Oh, that's a good question. So, in regards to the like visual cohesiveness of
Yeah.
everything, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that a lot of that I think has to do with my art director, who's
Okay,
amazing. And so I've been lucky enough to work with the same art director on all of my books. Her name is
cool.
Lizzie Brumley, and she's really great. Um, and I think she has a big part, especially with the covers, but with the books entirely, of having everything kind of look cohesive, even if, yeah, you have one book about time travel and one
Yeah,
book about a unicorn and one book about a haunted house, and they
right.
still share a lot of visual, I don't know, yeah, you can just kind of see. And it does, some of it is just they're made by me and my
Yeah.
hands, but also there's so much to do with the graphic design stuff that I wasn't really that big of a fan of doing, like Lizzie is amazing at, or she's amazing artist in her own right, and does such a good job of making everything look cohesive. And so that's one big part of it. And I think in terms of brand, it's interesting. I think of maybe my storytelling style as more of a brand than the visual style. Though I
Mm.
do think over time I've kind of developed color palettes that I use a lot or
Yeah.
that feel recognizable in a way, even if it's not really on purpose. It's just like things that I gravitate toward. I do
Yeah.
tend to use a lot of rainbow colors. It's just like
Yeah.
rainbow explosions of colors. And I
Right.
think over time I'm becoming I've been spending more time trying to be a little more restrained in color palettes and things like that. But brand wise, I think I do think a lot about stories. Uh, a lot of my stories have to do with like identity or like
Mhm.
coming up with ideas for working through, I don't know, ideas that I see talked about a lot, but maybe from a slightly different perspective or just what is interesting to me. It's like with the haunted house book, I definitely am not the first person to do a book that is from the perspective of a house. There is The Little House. That is the name of that book, I think. Wow. I'm like blanking on it. Very old, very well known from the
Yeah.
60s. Um, that's from the perspective of the house and definitely something that I looked at for reference and for ideas of how to make a house seem anthropomorphized and like having
Yeah.
feelings, because I don't want the house to be getting up and walking away or anything necessarily in this book, but you still want it to have recognizable emotional
Yeah.
facial features and things like that. So, yeah, I think I spent a lot of time thinking about ideas that I just want to see done from a slightly different perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. And I'm sure that like when you're working with your publisher,
Mhm.
like do you have to like kind of shift hats? Like you have like your writer hat and you're working with an editor, and then you have the art director and you're working with, the art director and kind of taking guidance from both, like two coaches.
Yeah, so I think I've learned recently that the way that I work with my editor and my art director is maybe not the way that everyone works with them. And
Yeah.
again, kind of in a privileged way of like we have worked together so long. I've worked with my editor on all of my books as well. I had a different editor, acquiring editor for my first book. His name was
Yeah.
Christian Trimmer, very great, but he had to leave. He moved to a different publishing house before the first book came out. And then my current editor, Justin Chanda, took over for that book and then has been my editor ever since. And
Oh.
so at this point, I think, and even kind of from the start, I work doing kind of words and pictures at the same time.
Mm.
And so, I do know a lot of people who are authors and illustrators who might write all of the words and then they go in and they do like a dummy book, which is what we call like a rough draft of it with all of the sketches. But
Yeah.
I'm kind of figuring them out at the same time. And so my editor and my art director, we kind of are on email chains all together and are kind of discussing it throughout. So there's less of the having to go back and forward hat that I do think
Yeah.
some people do and is how some people's brains work with this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I've been lucky to kind of think of it as all kind of like one cohesive storytelling experience where
Yeah.
we all have input about everything. So yeah.
Yeah, very cool.
Mhm.
And so I was like just immediately drawn to your new book, Cookie Time. Like
Ah, thank you.
my husband calls me a cookie head. Like he's like, you are
Mm.
a cookie head. You eat cookies all the time. If there's a cookie, you're gonna find it. And
Mhm.
so I love the premise for your new book so much because there is always that moment where you're baking a cookie and you're like, God, is it done yet? Like, do I have
Yeah.
to wait for this? And then I have to wait for it to cool down.
Mhm.
How did the idea for Cookie Time come about?
Yeah, so I also love cookies.
Yes.
And so it was a combination of ideas that had kind of been swishing around in the back of my brain for a while. A while ago, sometimes I come up for like framing devices or like ideas for stories where like this isn't really a plot, but it's like an
Thing.
interesting
Yeah.
starting point. Yeah. And so I'd thought about how it would be fun to write a book where it started with putting cookies in an oven and it ends with the cookies being finished. And the idea originally was, wouldn't it be funny to like you put the cookies in the oven, you have like some big giant adventure, and then you're coming back, but cookies only take like 10 minutes to bake.
Right.
So it's almost like the point of it is kind of being a timer of like, wow, you sure did a lot in 10 minutes. But I
Right.
didn't know what that story would be. And then I also really like science fiction and and especially time travel.
Right.
And I like thinking about time travel. And I have been thinking for a long time about how could I do a time travel picture book. And there are some out there, and they're all really great. But I was trying to come up with my own twist on that and like what that would look like. But I was really struggling with, what that would be about. And the things that I'm interested in most about time travel tend to be a little bit more like complicated in things like a
Yeah.
time travel paradox or, all of
Right.
these things. And I was like, this might be too much for a picture
Too
book.
much.
And so one
For a
day when
limited
I'm
amount of pages.
right, right, yeah, you only have, it's like, okay, if we want to take it up to like a chapter book or a middle grade,
Yeah.
like sure, but picture books
Yeah.
is like you're really pushing it. And my books sometimes are like pushing the page limit, I feel like to begin
They're
with.
like,
They get longer and longer. But nobody gives me a hard time about, but I'm sure there is a limit in which we'll have a discussion.
right.
But one day I was walking, I have two dogs and I like to walk them, and I do a lot of like creative thinking while walking my dogs. And I was thinking about, I don't know, just kind of thinking about nothing and everything or whatever. And
Mhm.
these two ideas kind of came together in my brain where I was like, oh, you could take this one thing that you are interested in doing and this other thing. And what if it's that you're putting the cookies in the oven? And the reason that they're having this big adventure in between this 10 minutes is that they're traveling through time with the additional humor of like, you can't wait the 10 minutes to get to these cookies. So like
Right.
we got to build a time machine. Like it's so over the top in a way of like,
Yeah.
why are you building this time machine? Is like we have to skip over this 10 minutes. We cannot handle it. And so they go, traveling, trying to get to the cookies. And of course, time travel is always more fun when like chaos ensues and
Sure.
you get a little bit too far forward or too far backwards. And then yeah, and then from there, just kind of trying to figure out what the interesting points would be to see with these kids. It's like it's fun to imagine the future. Can we get the past in
Yeah.
there? If they're
Yeah.
in the past, can they interact with themselves?
Right.
How confusing is that or isn't that? And that sort of thing. So yeah,
Does
yeah.
someone steal the cookies? Like,
Right, yeah. Is it like yeah, and then the additional level of like when you're doing time travel, trying to make sure that visually you can tell the difference that you're in a different time. So I
yeah.
worked a lot with my art director on making sure that we were doing different color palettes for each timeline. So and
Right.
the fonts are different in the different timelines. So to try to clue you in to we have gone to a different place.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's so fun, and I love that it's just like, I love that their time machine is box, like,
yeah.
and it's just so cute, like, I think all of us, well, I'll speak for myself, as a kid was like, "I'm gonna get in this box and it's gonna
Yeah,
be magical," and I think at
yeah.
one point my sister was like, "Let me push you down the stairs in it," and
Oh,
then
for
she
sure.
almost did, and my mom was like, "No!" But we all had, I think, as kids, like, the moment where we're trying to take, like, a regular item and use imagination and turn it into something
Yeah.
like a time machine or what.
Yeah, and I wanted it to be something that, it's it would probably take more than 10 minutes to even build that time machine that
Right.
they built to begin with, but so, you have, like, suspension of belief for that, but,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, yeah, I mean, I wanted it to keep it pretty simple and pretty approachable in, like and relatable in that you could make this thing pretty quickly with things that are just around your house
Yeah.
to make this to try to do it, because I think there's a world in which I could have made this book where it's more explicitly a real time machine, that
Right.
isn't just a box,
Right.
that is like, oh, and we went out to the to the shed and used, I don't know, a
Right.
flux capacitor and
Right. That's
got
just
got
out
there.
there.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and so you're like, well, it's more fun if it's
Right.
like, is this real? Is it imaginary? Who knows?
Right.
It did or didn't happen. It doesn't
Right.
really matter. It's
Right.
fun and we made it.
It's such a fun book, and
Thank you.
I hope that you have some really big plans for it. Do you have author events coming up and anything exciting on the horizon?
Yeah, so I did a small tour for when it came out in the beginning of September. I went
Oh,
out to LA and San Francisco, and that was really fun. I've been out there before doing school visits and I always have a really great time. Lots of really
yeah.
great bookstores to partner with for events. And then I just did a book festival this past weekend, the Glen Rock Book Festival, which is in New
Cool.
Jersey, which is really great. It's run by the Curious Reader, which is a great bookstore.
Oh yeah.
Um, and then coming up, I'm doing Comic-Con, which is fun.
Ooh.
Yeah,
In New
it's
York?
fun. Yeah, New York Comic
Yeah.
Con. They do Simon and Schuster has a panel for picture books, and it's in one of the small rooms, but it's still fun to go to Comic Con and see lots of people in amazing costumes and get to
Yeah.
go and walk around. And this is the first time. Well, I'm going. This is the second time I'm going. I went last year too, but this is the first time I'm going with a book that can count as science fiction and
Yeah.
feels like it fits the vibe of Comic Con. So
Yeah.
and other than that, I don't have a lot of other things planned. I have a few I do, local visits sometimes and things like that. So yeah, I kept it kind of low key this time around, but that is fine by me. I like talking about books, but yeah,
Yeah.
so can
Yeah.
get not too
I
much.
bet like any bakery in New York would
Mm.
carry this book.
That's true. I should probably inquire. I know that there've been a lot of I've seen some really amazing cookies being made to like look like the characters or look like
Oh,
the cover of
cool.
the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I've been tagged in and those are amazing.
That's
So,
so fun.
yeah.
That's really cool.
Mhm.
Um, so I always ask people that come on here, just because we have a wide variety of listeners
Mhm.
and many of them are parents. Um, and I always like to ask, what kind of advice do you have for future generations that could be
Mm.
in general, or it could be that want to do what you do, or
Yeah.
become an author illustrator?
That's a great question. I always feel like kids have way better ideas and things to say than I do. So I'm like, I don't know. I feel like the future generations already got it. It's great.
They've got
But
it.
they got it. No, but I would say I guess for me, I think a lot about yeah, how I kind of got into this by really taking the moment to think about what it is that I spent time doing that I enjoyed and that I was actually spending my time doing. And so I guess if you are interested, especially in making picture books, and you really enjoy drawing, it would be just giving that the time that you want to give to it and seeing where it takes you. And maybe picture books aren't where you want to go. There's so many different things that you can do with drawing and
True.
storytelling and creative fields. Even if it's not your job, you can of course always do it as a hobby and make things to share with the people you love. So yeah, I guess just figuring out what it is that you really enjoy doing and figuring out a way to make that a part of your life is my tip.
Solid advice.
Yeah,
So,
thanks.
Jesse, thank you so much for being here. We'll post links to your website and
Okay.
where readers and listeners can pick up copies of all of your books, not just Cookie Time.
Mhm.
I'm so excited about Cookie Time. Cookie Time makes
Good
me.
time. Well, thank you so much again for having me. It was really great.
Thank you.